Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Authentic Physician. I am Dr. Amy Loden Tiffany, and I'm delighted today to have with me Dr. Ann Hirsch. Welcome, Dr. Hirsch.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
I am too. So we just recently met, and we are both in a online group of female physicians, and we were both struck each other as authors, and we have each had our own experience writing a book. But I really loved that you have this story to tell through yours. So why don't you start by introducing us to your work and what you've done with the book and what you're hoping for it to be and share for the community?
Well, I'll start with the fact that I'm an internist who was in private practice for 32 and a half years, and I retired in December of 2024 to pursue other things. So now I'm still involved in peer review at my local hospital. I teach medical coding to physicians to help maximize the reimbursement that they've already done the work for. They may as well get paid. And I do physician coaching, and I coach on all kinds of topics, ranging from burnout to closing charts to leadership development. But I really like to focus on behavioral and communication issues, the things that people who've gone through the peer review process. So don't ask me in any way, shape, or form how that relates to me deciding to write a book about menopause, because it
Okay,
totally doesn't. But, but
fair
as an
enough.
as an internist, one of the most common things that I dealt with, especially as unfortunately, I aged as my patients aged, and so we all kind of went through menopause together, is I decided that this was a topic that is just so, I think, misunderstood, and there's so much misinformation out there, especially after the Women's Health Initiative study in 2002. That I said, I just need to write a book that kind of says what I really think. And I didn't go into great depth on anything. I didn't want a 700-page tome that was really difficult to read. I just wanted something that was short and sweet, enough to kind of give people an idea about what's out there, and hopefully some ideas that maybe some of the things that they already think about menopause maybe aren't so much true, and that to just kind of give it another thought. The particular one is estrogen replacement therapy. I think that's really gotten a bad rap. And as a result, many of my patients developed osteopenia and osteoporosis because they weren't going to take, hormones. And that's a choice they, easily can make, but it has consequences. And so I decided
So
to write the
true.
book for that reason.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you bring that up too, because I'm also an internal medicine specialist. So we specialize in adults for our listeners. We parallel many of the things that happen in women's health from a non OBGYN view. And osteoporosis is a big one, hormone therapy, certainly all the changes that happen. And just to be clear, this isn't in someone's head. They are having real symptoms when they talk about all the changes that go with menopause. And so, even having these conversations a decade ago, I didn't hear them happening like we hear today. So, there's been a real recognition that menopause and perimenopause symptoms are very real for a lot of women. And I think that's amazing. So you write this book and your goal is to get it into the hands, it sounds like, of the people who need it the most, women who are dealing with it.
Absolutely.
As you've gone through that process and kind of watched it unfold, are there things that you've realized you didn't know about caring for the midlife women population or things you wish other doctors knew as they do it?
I think the biggest thing is to recognize that each woman is different and each woman brings different things to the table, because as you well know, some women absolutely can't take estrogen for various reasons. And so you need to look at, okay, well, what other options are there for them to manage these symptoms? And I think sometimes we just don't think about that. And I don't want to bash male physicians, but many male physicians don't have a good understanding of this. Certainly many female physicians don't either, but
Right.
certainly I've seen that. And so I think there's a lot of confusion out there from patients' perspective about, oh, I have headaches, I have joint pain, I have shortness of breath, I don't know, whatever. And they think that's all menopause. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, there could be some menopause in there, but maybe there's some other stuff going on too. And so I don't like the idea of people just attributing everything to menopause and then thinking, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. And so I just want people to know that there are options. And even if you choose not to take estrogen, which is totally reasonable, there are other options that we can talk about. And that's really what I wanted to get across.
Love that. And what I really honor about the way you're doing this is that so many times, for many reasons, physicians, nurses, associates can't go into the detail and the depth that this requires. So you've created a resource that is science-based, based on not only professional experience but lived experience, and compiled that in a way that hopefully the reader can be encouraged by. So first of all, thanks for doing that because I know that took a lot of time and effort.
I had no idea how difficult it is to write a book, and so I'm kinda like, "I don't think I'm ever gonna do that again, but we'll see. We'll see."
It is a lot of intention and work,
Yes.
so thank you for doing that and for creating that, and certainly if our listeners wanted to get a copy of it, where would they go?
Amazon is where it's located. So it's currently available in the Kindle version. It's also available in paperback. I'm still working on getting the hard book cover and the audiobook narrated, but that's where we are.
It's coming. So, I may have had my own menopause minute in all of this. What's the name of your book? Remind us.
It's called Not Your Mother's Menopause, and then there's a bunch of subtitles that I can't even
Uh-huh.
remember, but
Yes, that's
Not
what
Your
I thought.
Mother's Menopause, yeah,
So, and the reason I wanted you to say that is so many of our mothers experience menopause in a way that's going to be radically different than our generation does, just for the awareness and the openness to conversation, let alone anything else, right?
correct, absolutely.
My grandmother would have gone through menopause before the Women's Health Initiative came out, but my mom was after it, right? And now we have all this new data too. So, if there's one myth, just one tiny fraction of a myth that you could tell our listeners specifically about estrogen therapy when they hear and they're worried and they're trying to be educated, right? And they've read the data from the Women's Health Initiative, they see the things that can go wrong. How are those things different from what we do in menopause medicine today? That you could maybe just address one myth.
Honestly, I think the biggest myth is estrogen is bad. I think that's the biggest myth that I hear, that I see, is women from the Women's Health Initiative study
Yes.
have determined that estrogen is bad and that you should avoid it at all costs, and I'm gonna do this naturally, and I'm just gonna suffer through my symptoms, and that's what people do. And it's not bad. There's a lot that is beneficial. There are some risks, definitely. And I think the biggest one was cardiovascularly. It came out to be about a wash. Initially, it sounded like, oh, it's horrible. But when they actually went back and looked at the data, I think there were a few more heart attacks and a few fewer strokes. And so it ended up kind of being a wash cardiovascularly as well. So it's not as bad as people think it is. And rather than suffering and being miserable and then potentially sustaining other things like osteoporosis and the brain fog and all of the stuff that goes along with that, saggy skin, to name one. Um, all of those things, I think, it's not a bad thing, and it's the right thing for some people, and it's not the right thing for others. I just want people to know the difference.
Yes. Yes. And fully understand their options because to your point, they may choose against it even if they qualify for it. And that's
Absolutely.
completely legit as long as they're informed. I frequently tell my patients, listen, I'm kind of like your financial advisor, except I'm in medicine, right? Like I'm going to lay out all your choices, but you get to choose. And I don't have to agree with your choice, but I have to give you the choice so that you can make an informed decision.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you don't feel like you're doing your job as their physician. You wanna make sure you
Correct.
have all the options. Yeah,
Correct. And that does, in fairness, that takes a lot of effort on the physician's hat, right? And I'm going to, just for the purpose of our conversation today, acknowledge that there's wonderful physician associates and nurse practitioners and other caregivers within medicine, but just focusing on our today conversation for physicians. One of the things I hear from our colleagues frequently is, that's great, but I don't have time, right? Like I don't have the time to give this patient. And so I wonder if we can take a step back. And you did kind of mention you went through menopause with your patients, right? So if you take your physician hat off and you just have your patient hat on for a minute, what are some different areas besides education that maybe we need to do differently or better or completely reimagine within caring for midlife women?
gee, that's a tough question. I
I
think,
know, I'm sorry. I put you
no,
on the spot.
I know. I mean, there's so much, and I think most of it is education, so I'm not sure there's a lot else that I can speak to.
Uh-huh.
But I think, going to your question, the initial thought I was having when you talked about, how we don't have enough time, you get a 15-minute visit and you have to deal with their osteoporosis prevention, their pap smear, their mammograms, their colonoscopy,
Yep.
the cholesterol, all the stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so I think sometimes finding other ways to educate people, whether that's referring them to a book, whether that's creating a video yourself that you kind of at least tell them your own personal thoughts, whether that's creating a handout you give people, just something to give them so that they can come back to you and have questions specifically lined up. Because I think, sometimes you dread it when the person brings out the piece of paper that's 15 pages long with all the questions on it, but at least it helps to organize your thoughts and organize the questions. And so you can answer them appropriately.
Yeah.
So I think just that, but again, that goes mostly to education. I think there's so many other things that go into it, just, having a community of people around you that can support you, and that's
Yes.
not necessarily just family and friends, but it could be coworkers, it could be people in your neighborhood, that you don't really know a lot, but just casually. Um, Exercise groups, people join groups that just take walks together once a month and or take hikes in the forest once a month or whatever. I think there's so much that we can do to support each other as women, but I think the biggest thing is keeping the myths out of our, you know,
Yeah.
language, because I
Yeah.
think there's so many myths out there that get propagated, and when one person says it, the other person doesn't really want to challenge it, and then it just goes you know, goes on and on and on and, inappropriately.
Yes. And we've all seen that in different areas of life. It's not specific to medicine. What is kind of interesting to medicine, and it probably happens in other professions. I picked up on it. You said it, they bring the long list in.
Mhm.
And I love that you said that because when we're wearing our physician hat, we look at that list and it has 15 questions and we're like, we have 15 minutes and we're like having to do this checkbox that we're required to, right? And at the same time, over the last, let's say 10 to 20 years, any women's health magazine you get, any media interview you hear, anything, what do they tell women to do? Bring a list,
Right,
right?
right.
And so, like, on the one hand, we're telling them, bring a list, be organized in your thoughts. And on the other hand, we're like, oh my gosh, she brought a list, right?
Exactly, exactly.
I'm like,
Bring
oh
a
my gosh.
short list.
Yes. And so, I don't know if it's helpful for our listeners, but one of the things I'll often do when I see the list is like, oh, good, you brought a list. What's the number one thing that we have to walk away on this list today and answer? And if we don't get to the others, we'll make a different appointment. We'll keep working until we get it done. Because I do think that it's good they advocate for themselves. But there's no way we can get through it in our 15 minutes. It's not realistic. So that's one thing I have found helpful. Are there any things that you would tell women besides bring a small list? Like, is there a better way to organize their questions? Anything you found helpful?
I think it's important to be educated as much as you can on the topic before you come in. But
Sure.
again, make sure that the things that you're reading are legit, because sometimes you get stuff, oh, I saw on the internet, blah, blah, blah. And it's like totally
Yeah.
not accurate.
Yeah.
So I think being as educated as possible. But I think I agree with the list. I think a short list is great. And I do the same thing. I say, okay, what are the top 2 or 3 things on the list? And we're going to start with the most important and we're going to get as far as we can down your list. But if we don't get to all of these things, I don't want to short shrift them. I want to make sure we talk about everything, and
Yeah.
so we'll just do that at another appointment.
Yeah.
That's usually I do the exact same thing that you do, because I really do want to answer their questions in the most important thing to them.
Exactly. One of the things, backstory, my almost 13-year-old daughter about fell over the other day when I told her I was older than Google. And I'm pretty sure that you've had many times people come to you and say, I looked this up on Google, right? And so we've kind of gotten used to Dr. Google. But more recently, we've been introduced to Dr. ChatGPT. And those conversations I find fascinating. A lot of our colleagues are at least internally, I hear negative discussion about that, right? And we can acknowledge that it's frustrating. But what I find really fascinating about it, and I actually like when people do it, is what did they say? Like, what did it say? Are we hallucinating or do we have really good data here? And how does this apply to you? And so I don't know that I would follow the camp that says we can't use it. I do think there's some scary aspects of it,
Mhm.
but I really do want to embrace whatever the patient's already comfortable with and having brought to me. Because that, for me, trust is the most important part of our relationship. And if I'm going to immediately say, roll my eyes or cross my arms, right? Like, I'm just sending this patient signals that I'm not interested in what they've already shown initiative to look into.
Agreed.
And I have had some really funny things that ChatGPT has said that I'm like, "I promise you, you don't have that. That is not even, like, possible." And so and a common example is, like, a female is not gonna have prostate disease, right? Like, you just don't. We know that. So we can rule that one out. And having those kind of, moments of levity and reassurance. But when it comes to trust in medicine, one of the things I've experienced as a patient with physicians who know I'm a physician is it's almost like they disconnect from that knowledge, which on one hand, you wanna be able to see someone holistically and not have a bias in what you do, and on the other hand, it's felt very dismissive. So I can only imagine the person who isn't medically trained and who's done their due diligence to research or to understand something beforehand, how dismissed they must feel by those same type of interactions. And I wonder, in your own experience over the years in the exam room, are there things that you would take away and teach your younger self now? Is there an idea of how you handle this whole accumulation of information differently than you did when you started? And I'll give myself an example to help you understand where I'm going. When I first got out of residency, And I trained at a great place. We were told really though evidence-based medicine was a certain thing, right? It was a certain type of study, it was done in a certain way. Anything else wasn't legit. And it wasn't necessarily said that anything else was bad, but it was implied that if you did anything else, you weren't practicing good medicine. And I've over the last 15 years of my journey, I've realized there's a lot of things that just because we don't have evidence for, we also don't have evidence of harm. And if there's not evidence of harm and there's not a benefit, then I think it becomes a lot more of a gray area. If we clearly know something's bad, we shouldn't do it. We should never jump out of an airplane without a parachute. That is always going to have a bad result, right?
Absolutely.
So sometimes we use common sense, but I wonder, I would go back to my freshly scrubbed new attending self and say, hey, take a deep breath because everything is not as rigid as it seems. And there's a lot of nuance here that you didn't get to see in academics because there was a certain way they had to get you through the system versus what's real life in my world today. I don't know if that helps clarify the question of what I'm thinking a little bit, but
Well, I have 2 thoughts because they almost seem like a little different questions, but I agree with you. I think there's a lot of off-label use of medications in particular for various conditions that we found really work well. And as long as you kind of explain to the patient, "Hey, this might be a seizure medicine, but we're gonna use it for your migraines or your peripheral neuropathy," or whatever it might be, I think as long as you explain that and people understand, especially if it's one of the psychiatric medications, sometimes people think, "Oh, I'm gonna go to the pharmacy and the pharmacist is gonna think I'm depressed or suicidal or whatever." It's like, you try to explain that to them so they understand. But I think the other thing that I would have told my younger self is to be validating because, like you said, these people have done a lot of research. They do have certain views about things. Some of them might be cultural, some of them might be from how they grew up, some of them might be from what they've learned on Dr. Google or Dr. ChatGPT. And I think you need to validate that those are real, they're real feelings, they're real
yes,
thoughts, they're real ideas that these people come in with. And I think to validate that and then take them from where they are. I always take the patient from where they are because you have your diabetics who are really anal about making sure their A1C is 5.5 and they'll do everything they can. And then other people who are like, hey, I'm good with a 7. You just have to take people from where they are and try to help them go from that point. And so I think remembering that and validating where people are to start with is so important because you don't want to go, oh, well, that's wrong.
right.
That
Yeah,
doesn't build any kind of trust at all. And I think that's a place you can definitely go wrong.
that is a beautiful way to put it. And I think you're right. We all want to be seen. We
Yes,
want to be deeply seen and heard and understood. And that is just a human need.
absolutely.
So connecting on that level, I love that. Thank you. That's good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that because I think it makes for better relationships between your doctor and yourself, and it certainly made my end of the transaction much nicer. I enjoyed meeting with my patients for that reason. We had a
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to switch on you just a little bit. I'm wondering, like, you're in your career years working in the clinic and you're busy all the time. You're wearing your physician hat all day long, and then you come home. And tell us a little bit about that to the degree you want to. Were there did you feel like it was a big shift to come home? Did you feel like you were working after dinner all night long? Was there a clear delineation in your mind between personal, professional? Anything you want to share or comment on there?
Okay, so you're asking the wrong person that question.
Okay. Okay.
And I'll tell you why. So my husband's a cardiologist, and so I come home and it's medicine till we go to bed.
Uh-huh.
That's just the
Yes.
way it is. And frequently, because of the busy schedule at work, I would end up doing pajama time, and so there would be
Yes.
starting until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, whatever. And so, I definitely didn't feel like there was a good delineation. I know I've talked to people like Dike Drummond, who's very big on burnout, and he talks about having this ritual you do actually, like, in the garage, where you sit in the garage for a few minutes and you kind of take a couple of deep breaths and kind of let go of your day and kind of, okay, I'm moving into family mode. And I think I was able to do that a little bit better when the kids were young. My girls are 32 and 29 now, so they're not in the house anymore. I think it was easier then because you knew that you were going to be a mom and you knew you were going to be a wife. And so I could let that be a little bit. And I don't think I was quite as busy in the evenings. But lately, once the kids are gone, it's like the work expands to fill the time you have. And so evenings were just more medicine. And unfortunately, being married to a cardiologist doesn't help.
No, no, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Was there a point at all, where you kind of resented that? Or was it always just, "I'm cool with this, and this is how I am?"
I definitely resented it. I think it contributed to my own personal burnout, which happened about 2 years before I retired.
Okay.
Things got to be really crazy. I can tell you more about that story if you wanna hear it.
Yeah, go ahead, tell us.
Okay, so 3 of our partners in the practice retired, and we wanted to try to maintain those patients as much as we could in the practice. Many of them had been there for 30 to 40 years, and so you could
Wow.
imagine their charts
Yeah.
were, you know, very long, and so to just review a chart to be ready to take on that new patient was 2 to 4 hours. So they asked us, "How many new patients of the 3 retiring doctors do you guys wanna take on?" And I said, "Well, none," because I had a closed practice for 30 years. But then I thought, "Well, I should be a team player. I'll take 1 a week just to help out." So 1 a week quickly became 1 a day, that quickly became 2 a day, that quickly became 3 a day, and I didn't realize it, until I'm up till 2 and 3 in the morning some days getting these charts prepared or charts finished for the day, that I was resenting that hugely, and so I finally realized with the help of a coach that I just needed to set some boundaries. I was complaining, "I'm tired all the time, I don't wanna do this, I just wanna lay around on the couch on the weekend," like, I was complaining about all these things, but the real problem was that I wasn't setting boundaries. And once I realized that I needed to set boundaries, I went back to work and said, "Okay, look, I'll take 1 new patient a day, period, end of story, like, that's it." And once they were able to honor that, work got a whole lot better, and I realized a lot of things about myself and about kinda how I can also now help my coaching clients who are dealing with very similar things. Sometimes you just don't see your own blind spot. Trained as you are, you just don't see your own blind spot.
That's true. That's definitely another one of those human problems, right? Like, it's
Yes.
not specific to medicine. So I wanna pick up on kind of something the listeners may not have caught. You tell us again, how long does it take to prepare for a new patient?
It depends on how old they are and how many medical problems they have. But with these patients who'd been in our practice for I mean, some of them had only been there for 5 or 10 years, but many of them had been there for 30 to 40 years, and their charts were immense. And, it would take between 2 and 4 hours per patient. And again, a younger patient may not take quite that long, but for example, my husband does this because he sees lots of new patients on a regular basis in clinic, and it will take him 45 minutes to an hour to get through just the important stuff that's related to cardiology just to get ready for a new patient.
Okay. So I'm a new patient coming to see you or transferring within your practice. I'm given, let's say, 30 minutes for a new patient visit with you. Part of that time I know is going to be talking to your assistant, verifying my information. I don't actually have 30 minutes with you, but you've already spent a certain amount of time beforehand to get ready for it. You meet me, we talk about it. How much time are you spending after I leave, taking care of whatever came up in that visit and closing out my encounter?
Again, I think that varies a lot depending on what we talk about, because sometimes we talk about 1 or 2 things, and sometimes we talk about 15 things. But I would say anywhere from 10 minutes to probably an hour, hour and a half if it's a really long encounter that really required a lot of, you know, work, looking things up, decision making, talking to other consultants,
Yeah,
arranging care, that kind of thing. So
yeah.
it's considerable.
And so I just want that to our listeners understand that because that's playing out 20, 30 times a day, every day, right?
Absolutely.
So when the Mayo Clinic published their study and said that for every 1 hour a doctor's spending in clinical time face to face with a patient, they're spending 2 hours on average doing everything else for the care provided in that hour. And that's why I think that's probably one of the most misunderstood things within medicine that patients don't realize that if we actually saw patients 8 hours a day, we'd be doing work 24 hours a day, right?
Mhm.
Oh,
Correct.
wait, we are seeing patients 8 hours a day, and we still have all that other 16 hours of work. And so context, that can quickly escalate. In my own story, I had about 3,000 patients. I was working 50 hours in the clinic and going home and doing 2 to 3 hours a night, working 6 to 8 hours each weekend day, and I was never caught up, ever. And now hopefully that kind of makes sense to people. Why? Is because there's so much extra. And there's been some debate that maybe women take more time than men. They're more thorough, they're more conscientious. Maybe, maybe not. The point is there's still a lot of extra.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's one of the big myths I see that people don't realize how long it takes. And that's just my time. Now, what if I need my assistant to do something or research something or a pharmacist to look up something, right? Then you can see how this is playing out for every single person, and this is why there are such time restrictions, uh, independent of the idea that there's not enough people to provide care, right? Just
Absolutely.
in the people we have, that's what we're dealing with. So, what about you? What are some disconnects you see between what, like the patient experiences and what they think is happening versus what the reality is? And we talked about this, for example. Another one I sometimes wonder about is, do patients feel like we have more control than we do? Can we get medicines approved or procedures approved? So for example, and I don't know if you want to comment on that or if you have your own, but I wonder if you've seen anything.
Well, definitely the issue with providing, with getting prior authorization for procedures and or medications. Sometimes they just think we can just do that and it should just happen in the same day. And it sometimes takes 2, 3, 4, or 5 days to get these things approved and then to go back and forth between the pharmacy and or the radiology department or whatever it might be. So that stuff does take a lot of time. And I think they don't understand that. And they don't understand sometimes that, just because they come in with low back pain and want an MRI, that may not be an appropriate indication for an MRI, and let's try these other things first before we go there because that's what they're going to require anyway. And I think sometimes people don't understand that. I just want to know what's going on, they say. And it's like, I get that, but I think clinically we know what's going on, a good percentage of the time, and we can move forward because it's not going to change our management. If it's not going to change what we do, why waste the time and money? So there is that. But the other thing I think is the amount of time we spend with them. I write at the top of the page, I would write the time I walked in the room and the time I walked out of the room. So I
Okay.
track because now we do a
Yeah.
lot of time-based coding, as you know. And so I would write that down and it would be, 20, 30, 40 minutes, depending on the patient. And they would say, oh yeah, she only spent 5 minutes with me.
Right.
And it's
Yes.
like, no, I think I spent a little more. And you did because you have your piece of paper that proves it. And so I don't know where that disconnect is. Like, it makes me think there's a failure on my part to make them feel heard or seen. Because if they're thinking I only spent 5 minutes and we really spent 20 or 25,
Right.
that's a disconnection. I always took that on myself to say, okay, well, I didn't make them feel that they got what they needed. And maybe that's true, maybe that's not. I don't
That's interesting. And so you're really carrying an unseen burden, perhaps,
know.
as you're going through this because you feel like it's a failure on your part.
I mean, to some degree,
Interesting.
when that
Okay.
happens, you feel like you somehow didn't do what the patient expected. And I know we can't always do what the patient
Right.
expects. Don't get me
Right.
wrong. I get
Yep.
that. But I think at least when it comes to the time, it's like when they say, oh, she only spent 5 minutes in the room with me. And I realize they're not talking like looking at their watch kind of thing,
Right.
but that
That's
was
how it
the sense
felt.
that they got.
Yeah.
It kind of makes you feel like, well, okay, I didn't make them feel heard or seen in some way, shape, or form.
I have noticed in my own clinical experience that those encounters, I have a computer in the room versus when I don't,
Mhm.
people feel I spent the time very differently, perhaps because of eye contact or facial interactions. Um, but that comes at a cost,
Yes.
right? And you're talking about boundaries earlier. And I think this is probably true in every profession that we all have to decide, like, where do we allocate our time resource? But I do think there's just something unique about medicine because my husband's not a physician, and I watch how he allocates his time. He's in the legal field. I watch how my siblings who aren't in the medical field, how they talk about their, and I just don't hear this theme the same way I hear it in medicine. I agree with you. I think that's a really interesting perception. I never felt that my shoulders were big enough to carry that kind of extra. And so I can't say I had the same experience. I would say I probably got in more trouble because people thought that I spent the time, but that didn't communicate to my team what was going on. And partly that was because I was rushing to the next room to spend the time, but I hadn't actually told the team what to do. And I thought I'll write it down later. I'll put it here in a quickie note, and then I can't find it at 10 p.m. when I'm trying to write my notes. Uh, let's talk about notes just for a second too, so that the folks understand. Some with all the electronic digital applications we have, there's a lot that does flow automatically in. So every time we tell people fill out this form and they're putting in their information, if it's digital, a lot of that carries forward. One of the things that really ticks me off when I take my kids to the doctor, and I have 5 kids, so I feel like I do this enough to have a good say here. They make me fill out these paper forms. And then it goes into this black abyss, right? And you and I know the abyss exists, but we can't even find it when we're looking for what's in the abyss. What are we doing? Like, why are we doing this? What help me.
It's a good question, and it's frustrating because the same thing happens to hospitalized patients, you know? They'll
Yes,
get asked the questions in the emergency room by the nurse, by the physician. They go upstairs, the nurse asks them the same questions, the physician asks them the same questions, and then sometimes the social worker will come in and ask them the same questions, and they're like, "Really?" So I think that a lot of practices have gone to having patients enter things electronically, so it actually shows up in a place that can be found.
yes,
But I think that's one of the huge problems in medicine is that repetition, and it's frustrating on the part of the patient. It's just like when you call the credit card company and you've put your credit card number in on your phone,
yes.
and then they say, "What's your credit card number?" And you're like, "Well, why did I
Seriously?
enter it?" You know, like, and I get it. It's the same thing in medicine, and I think we have a ways to go in that regard. But I agree, there's a lot of stuff that's in the chart that just is useless. And I think because of the way the chart load has become, there's a lot of 20-page documents that have maybe a page worth of information that's actually useful. So there's all kinds of sides to that problem.
It's a real one. So if you're listening and you're like, "Why are they making me fill it out again?" The answer is, "We don't know," because that's what we're doing. So, we laugh about it, but it is frustrating, and being on the patient side, I acknowledge it's dumb.
Yes,
There's as technologically advanced as we are, we could be doing a lot better here. Um,
absolutely.
and so for someone who's listening who can figure out that problem, please start solving it and please help us because this is prolific throughout every clinic and hospital in this country. Um, I went up to Mayo Clinic a few years ago to get a second opinion, and I was blown away by how well orchestrated what they did was. Now they are digital. As soon as I walked in the building, my phone buzzes and it says, "We see you're here. Are you coming upstairs for your appointment?" I was like, "What? This is creepy, but okay."
Big
So
brother.
yeah, I'm like, "Okay, I am going to the next thing." But it was really well done. And so I think there are places and pockets where it's happening well, but that hasn't been translated to every person's experience. And certainly, I would argue it's not the same in cities versus smaller towns or more rural areas. And that's a real problem because that also doesn't build trust. Like, why are people getting different levels of care based on their zip code? We know it's happening, and it's happening both in the urban and rural areas. And so we can't all solve all the problems, but starting with building trust is the person in front of you, right?
Absolutely.
And what can we do for that person? And that's partly why I ended up leaving academic and corporate medicine. I own my own business now. And we decided we're going to have 30-minute appointments. Now, there's a cost to that, right? Like that has to
Absolutely.
be made up somewhere financially for the business to be able to run. And so people do it different ways. That was the one I chose. But as you've left organized medicine, you're doing your own adventures now in a different way. I wonder, are there other things that you can see that maybe someone working in the system isn't seeing? Any ideas that you've had since you left? They're like, oh, we should have done it that way. Or exciting things you're pursuing that are new and different. Just where your journey's at this point.
I think when I'm hearing you talk, I think that it just keeps going back to my medical coding training because I think so many of us don't understand how coding works. And I think we're looking at some of the old ways we coded prior to 2021 when, everything changed since then.
Uh-huh.
And so the time-based coding is probably the most important for most of us in most specialties. I think 70 to 80% of our visits can be coded based on time. But I think also knowing the specific phrases that need to go in your note, which is one of the things we provide, is to try to give people like, just put this phrase in your note and then you're covered and you've got that. And then if you're going with medical decision making as your way to code, you've got those elements. So I think definitely that can help and streamline a little bit about the pajama time because it's a real thing and there's no way around it. I think the thing you mentioned about forms is one of the things that could be done better. I wish there were a way to make the prior authorization process better because I know that's frustrating for both doctors and patients. And I think the other thing is this denial of, or lowering of the, or down coding, I guess, that some of these insurance companies are doing, coding the fives and the fours down to a three. I think, again, I don't think you need to be terribly fearful of that as long as your documentation holds up, but it does provide an extra level of frustration because now you have to have office staff who have to resubmit those claims and rebill them. And it just takes a lot more time before you actually get paid and a lot more time you're spending paying people to do things that really don't need to be done. So there's so many inefficiencies that don't even get me started or we'll be here all day.
Fair enough. Let's take that idea though and take it a step further. Why should a patient care about that? Like, isn't this just business as normal for medical clinics? Like, how does it affect patients for this to happen?
Well, I think they need to understand that, number 1, that that's what we're dealing with, the amount of time that goes into the before visit preparation, the actual visit itself, and then the after visit, because we already talked about the time that takes. But also, we may not be able to have all the staff that we want. I know clinics where they don't have any MAs and they have to go out to the waiting room and get their patients themselves because they can't afford MAs. And part of the reason they can't afford MAs is because of this, billing requirement that they keep going back and forth. And the prior authorization process that takes a lot of time and effort. You have to have people filling out forms, making phone calls, sitting on hold, doing all those things. And it takes a lot of time. And I think sometimes that really impacts what a practice can provide to patients in terms of amenities, in terms of equipment that they can have on site to make their visit, more streamlined, in terms of just the personal touch, the personal phone call back about a test result, whatever it might be, that practices just can't afford to do that because overhead is so ridiculously high from all the things that we're required to do for kind of unnecessary reasons. I think that's one of the biggest issues.
Yeah, you're making me think. I was talking to a dermatologist yesterday, and she doesn't have a medical assistant MA in the sense that you and I might think of someone rooming and helping you kind of get everything done. She has robots in her office
Oh my
rooming her
goodness.
patients.
Whoa.
And I was like, "What world am I living in? Like, how is this happening?" Yeah, so there are some really cool things out there, but what was interesting to me and what she said was that some of her patients and she used the term older patients, so I kind of envisioned 50 plus. I don't know if that's what she meant, but they were like, "You're taking jobs away. You're taking jobs away from people." And
No.
and it kinda goes to what you're saying, like, on the one hand, there's an expense for a robot, and that's a fixed expense, and once you're done, versus a human running it and helping run the clinic, but a robot in the clinic in today's world is just not something most people have seen. And so I wonder, is it true that they're taking away jobs, or is that another perception that we're gonna see come up as many people start more and more of this starts happening? And all the work you just described, all of it takes time. None of it is easy. None of it can necessarily be automated because you're dealing with individual people. And so how as you look toward the future and you think about how do we make it cleaner, better, um, anything come up for you and what that looks like?
I'd never thought of a robot. That's a great idea. I wonder if patients find that impersonal.
I think they do.
Yeah.
She did mention that some of
Yeah.
them don't care and some of them and I got to thinking, wow, if I used robots in my clinic, I would have to almost email my clinic patients ahead of time and say, "Hey, we're trying this. I know it's gonna be bad in some ways, and you're gonna love it in other ways. I want your feedback," right? And kind of set it up so that it doesn't come across like the very first time this woman comes in and she's like, "There's a robot rooming me?
What?
Is my doctor a robot? Like, what's happening?"
I love it.
It really stunned me when she was talking about it. So I thought that
So
was neat, but wow.
the answer to your question is, I don't think we're taking jobs away from people, and I say that
Yeah.
because this happened with COVID, certainly, there were a lot of people laid off or who left work for various reasons, and unfortunately, after COVID was over, those people did not come back to work, and so it is impossible sometimes to even find an MA or find a nurse or whatever person you might need in your office to actually fill that job, and so, I don't think people are going, "Oh, there's so many MAs, we just, we're gonna choose to use robots instead." I think people are saying, "We don't have MAs, we can't afford MAs, whatever it might be, they're not available or they don't work out. You get people who really aren't very well trained or don't work well in your particular environment. And so I think they're looking for alternative ways to manage the workload in a way that actually is available to them.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just an interesting idea. It's like,
Yeah,
wow.
totally.
But, when you're on the patient side, I think that's perhaps what as I experience the physician and the patient hat, I think that one of the biggest disconnects for me is I don't think we do a good job being in the patient's shoes first. And like if you think about it, you go to college and if you go straight through, you go straight to medical school. So you're in your mid 20s, right? You do your residency, maybe your late 20s, 30s, but you don't really have that necessarily lived experience as a patient because there's so many things you have to have normal to even get to where you are, right? Like you can't go in with all the stuff that some people are dealing with. And so I realized in my own story, it wasn't until I became a patient that I really felt like my quality of care. I don't think it was bad. I just don't think it was as good as it was once I understood what it meant to be a patient. once I watched my parents go through things or my children go through things, both before and after becoming a doctor. So I think there is a little bit of just life experience you have to do the care in a way that's helpful. I wonder, just in thinking about the patient hat for a second. Forget doctors. Let's just think about professional women who are in their 40s. They're trying to help their kids, their parents, their neighbor, whoever. They're running their full-time job. They're running their job they work for free in their home. And it's so much. It's so much. They don't see that there's a different choice. They're doing what they can to outsource, to delegate all the things, but they still feel like they're just really exhausted and stretched thin. Is there any advice, having gone past maybe that phase in your life, that you would give to that person of what can you lay down? What are you doing that you don't have to do? And help her see that blind spot you were talking about earlier, so that she can really start to have a little breathing room and start to focus more on what is.
You sure know how to ask the hard questions, don't you?
I know, sorry. I'm working on it.
So I think the first thing is to really prioritize and think about what is actually important and matters. Because sometimes we think, oh, I have to do this, 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 and this. And if you really look at your list, it's like, well, I don't really have to do that. That could probably go. I don't necessarily have to do the total job I was planning to do for this. Maybe I could streamline that and, make it a smaller job. So I think prioritizing, because you think about, okay, on my deathbed, what am I going to think? Should I have done that extra PTA meeting or made cookies for the bake sale or, whatever it might
Right.
be? Sometimes you just can't. You can't do all things for everybody. And I think being a two physician household, we definitely kind of had to give up things because, we just couldn't do it. The other thing I think is trying to make sure you take care of yourself. And I know this kind of sounds a little, pie in the sky, the self care. But the idea of maybe trading with some other person in your neighborhood or a friend and saying, come and you take care of my kids for the day, especially if you don't have a spouse. Come and just watch my house, take care of things for a day. I'm going to go to the spa. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to go walk around in the woods. I'm going to go, um, you know, hang out with a friend, have lunch, whatever it might be. And it could be a couple of hours, it could be a day, but you trade off and do that for the other person because you're not going to do all the things they would normally do. You're just going to do the things that have to get done. And yet you're going to have that day to take care of yourself. And I think we don't tend to do that enough. And I think I talked about that a little bit in my book about how just having a community of women around you who are going through the same thing can be really helpful because we can support each other more than I think we do. I think we all just feel like we just have to grin and bear it and do all the
Yes.
things. And we
Yes.
don't necessarily have to do all the things. And I
Right.
think looking at that list and prioritizing is probably the most important because I look back at some of the things I did when my kids were in school and I didn't need to do those things. And, I wish I hadn't, but at the time they seemed really important.
Right. Right. And they take up a ridiculous amount of space and noise in our head.
Yes.
And sometimes I've noticed in my own life, you mentioned, at the beginning of what your answer, you were talking about really prioritizing and setting aside time. You have to just schedule the time to prioritize things, right?
True.
Like, it has to be an appointment with yourself that I'm going to take the time, put an hour on my calendar so I can plan to what
Right.
I'm going to prioritize,
Yes.
because our busy lives don't let us do that well,
Right.
without a ton of intention. And so I'm curious, like, as a physician and as a woman, what tension have you felt in your own life, if you can share, about caring for others while trying to care for yourself? How has that worked out?
I think that I mean, again, I wish I'd have known some of these things when I was younger because I think I tended to take care of others and not myself. So the first thing was always, taking care of the patients always came first, no matter what. That if family things had to come second because it just was the way it was. Second thing was family, and I wish I'd taken more time to be with my family. I look back and I've talked to both of my kids about this and said, I just wish I was there for you more. I wish I could have been involved in your life more. I wish I didn't have to work so much. And my youngest, who's now a physician, actually said to me, "Mom, you showed us that we could do it all. You showed us that we could have a career and have a family and that we could do it all." And that gave us a lot of motivation to do what we're doing. And so I've got a physician now as a daughter, and I've got a psychologist as a daughter. So they both
Okay.
figured it out, obviously.
Yeah.
But you know, you do kind of regret that time you didn't spend. And then I think the third thing is your spouse. Again, being a two physician household was particularly difficult because our, you know, when we were young and had kids, we had to do alternating call schedules, so one of us would be home, so we never saw each other. But I wish I'd taken more time to just take, you know, again, have a friend watch the kids for a few hours and do date night or take a weekend trip somewhere or whatever, and utilize that option to kind of spend that time because I didn't. And, you know, things suffer as a result
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
whole family situation and your own personal situation.
And that's a lot of wisdom. And one of the things I'm going to point out that I don't know if our listeners would necessarily realize if they don't work in this world is that medicine has been taught to us to take first place in our lives. That is how we are trained. Dare I even say indoctrinated. And there are pluses of the philosophy that patients always come first. There's also harms of that philosophy and acknowledging that there is a trade off. I don't know that I understood that when I went to medical school, right? Like that was not something you could tell me the words, but not having lived it, I wouldn't understand. Similar to like, you know, residency. People think residency is what we see on TV, and it's a very different lived experience. There's a reason some people aren't don't finish, right? And it doesn't put us on a higher plane that does. It's really hard. Um, I don't think it's equal, but the closest thing I know to begin to compare it to is military. It's very structured. It's very you do this level or you can't go to the next level. And at that phase in your life, you've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in your education. So like your only thing is survive and thrive, right? Like that you've got to get through it. You got to do everything else comes second. But that doesn't stop when you get your first job as a physician. And the expectation of all your peers who are also providing clinical care is that you will carry your fair share. And if they need help, you'll jump in. Those no questions asked. You miss your kid's birthday party. Oops, too bad, so sad. And there's a growing number of physicians, I'd say probably the 45 under crowd, who are absolutely rejecting it, louder and more violently even than the over 45 crowd, even though I think there's more in that range that are now acknowledging too. So when I look at that and I look at there's physician shortages and then we have these expectations of each other. And then of course the insurance companies have their expectations of what we document so that they'll pay for it. And the patients want us to document well so that they don't have to pay for the visits, right? It begins to quickly spiral into a very toxic place for a human to be. And I wonder, you know, as we're closing, we're not going to solve that today, right? But acknowledging that I think is the first step for many of us in beginning to trust the system itself, the systems that's abused us, so that we can then care for ourselves and care for our colleagues and care for our patients. And of course, it didn't take us a year to develop a healthcare system like this. We're not going to solve this in a year. But my hope in having these conversations with other physicians is that we can to see more clearly. We all begin to see more clearly and really start to encourage each other to lay down the things that are breaking you. So hold on to the things that have value and to prioritize those. And so as we close, is there one thought, quote, idea, anything that you would leave our listeners with to encourage them as they continue in their journey forward?
Having not thought about this in advance, I would say
Yeah.
the answer to that is it's okay to say no.
Yes.
The prioritizing thing is so important. So make sure you take time for yourself. Make sure you figure
Yes.
out how to do that. And I realize when you kind of have, you know, X number of hours of patient care and then chart care and all the stuff you have to do, it's tough. But figure out a way that you can get rid of something on your plate that's not important. If that means leaving dishes in the sink, that means leaving dishes in the sink. You know, they'll get done the next day. But prioritizing yourself and learning to say no, because I think a lot of us don't set those boundaries. And I know when I set those boundaries, I tended to be the one who broke them. So, you know, remembering set the boundaries, it's okay, and maintain.
Have your own back. Like if you're going to set the boundary, stay with it
Exactly.
because you're worth it. And I think that transcends medicine. That's across all professions, right? Um, and certainly for women who are trying to do it all or feel like they have to, I'm going to tell you you don't. I'm going to just put it out there in the universe. You don't. It's okay. Because, like you were talking about earlier, Dr. Hirsch, when you're on your deathbed, what's going to matter? And studies have been done on this, right? Like there's books written about what are the 5 regrets of the dying. And one of them is not being brave enough to do what you cared about. Another one's caring too deeply about what other people thought, right? And so I like to think on my deathbed, it's not going to be the achievements or the accolades that are holding my hand, right? It's going to be my children if I've done a good job. And of course, everyone gets to define what is a good mom and what is a good doctor, et cetera. That's a different conversation, a different day. But give yourself permission to not do it. And it's okay. And have your own back and move forward 1% at a time, right? Just one little bit at a time. It will get you so far down the road. So it's been a real delight and pleasure to have you, and thank you. I know I just pulled out of the blue this conversation and said, "Hey, do you want to do this? Jump on, let's do it." And it's been great. I've had a lot of things that you've made me think about differently. So thank you for that gift. Uh, Tell us one more time the name of your book and where people can find it if they want to learn more.
So the name of the book is Not Your Mother's Menopause, blah, 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 blah. And it's on Amazon. And I can also be found on LinkedIn. There's lots of information about me on LinkedIn. So that's probably
Lovely,
the
thank
easiest
you.
way.
Well, I hope we'll be able to connect again soon. I enjoyed learning from you, and certainly we will continue to have these conversations with other physicians over the coming weeks, really looking at what is it like to be a female physician and how do we start to rebuild trust in medicine? How can we really change the system within? And I think that starts with each of us. So thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you next time on The Authentic Physician. Bye.